Hello and welcome once more to Conscious TV. My name is Iain McNay and my guest today is Ginger Gilmour. Hi Ginger.
Hi.
And I found a book. I always look through the magazine of the Scientific and Medical Network, and they have a network magazine every few months. I always scour that for interesting books. And I found this book, Memories of the Bright Side of the Moon, which I thought interesting subject, interesting title, interesting person. So invited Ginger along to the studio. We've got lots to cover. She's had a very fascinating and also up and down life, and we're going to just go through her life and see what she learned and see who she is now. So, in 1971 you met somebody and it was love at first sight.
It was, yes.
Just tell us what happened.
I lived in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and the people I lived with had tickets to go to see this group Pink Floyd, and they wanted me to come. And it was hard for them to get me to go because I wasn't into all those things then. But I decided I would. And there, as I sat alone in our seat, because they were big fish in a little pond, they went backstage. And I just watched these English people, men, walking around, setting up the gear in their English outfits when the band comes on.
The English outfits.
Yes, the rock and roll outfits. They had Go Hill boots, bright colors or snakeskin, and Granny Takes a Trip velvet jackets of all kinds of colors, and tight black Sterling Cooper jeans, all the fashion apparently then, and different t-shirts. And after the gig was just, the music was incredible, just incredible. They had sound in the round, and it was an experience of oneness for me.
So you experienced oneness at the gig?
With the audience,
yes.
Yeah. The audience, they had sound in the round, and what they were playing lifted my spirits, and I certainly felt a union with the oneness. I mean, I had taken alternative drugs early on, LSD and things, and so I knew when that would be happening amongst people, certainly within me. And after the show was over, I was very elated, and we all went backstage. And again, they're running around talking to everybody, and I was standing alone. And fortunately, one of my customers, because I had a paraphernalia boutique, was there so I could talk to somebody. And the next thing you know, Dave Gilmour comes up to me, big blue eyes, looks me straight in the eye and says, "Hi, I'm David." And the next few days, we invited them to various events, one of which was a roller skating party in Detroit. From Ann Arbor, we drove down there, had them in the car. And what was interesting is Orson Welles' War of the World was on the radio. And they came into it after it had started. And Alice Cooper had given them some mind-altering drugs, and they were high, and they thought the Martians were landing by the time they got to Detroit. I was in a different car, and I was a really good roller skater. And later on, after I came back to England with David, his manager told me that David was saying, "Cool, she's a dream on wheels." So that's how we started. I wound up being on the road for 2 weeks, the end of the tour.
But it was love at first sight, you say in the book, for you.
Yeah, and him, yeah.
He was like a Prince Charming.
He was my Prince Charming.
Yeah, yeah. So here started a whole catapult out of your life.
Yeah.
Into the band at that time. They were, because you met in '71, I'm looking at my notes here, they had Atom Heart Mother out, Relics had been released, and then they were working on Metal, I think, at that time, or touring Metal.
They were touring Metal, yeah.
So it was relatively early days, but they were still a pretty successful band.
Well, I don't know, they were building. They became very successful on Dark Side of the Moon.
Yes.
That's money took them to a higher level. They're much more an underground band in some ways.
Yes.
The normal press and people, Rolling Stones didn't get on with them at all then, you know.
But there was a moment when you were lying next to David, and do you want to talk when you knew you were meant to be with him?
Yes, that was something that I'll never forget. We had left the after gig party. We were in Montreal, and we were sleeping, and I woke up, and there was this amazing light in the room, and I looked at David, and he was the image of Christ, and it was, I thought, okay, this is a sign, but I didn't know about signs then. Looking back on it, I know the experience, and I said, right, I'm meant to be doing what I'm doing.
And so that gave you somehow the confirmation to be with him. And yeah.
We were on the road then, and when he said, do you want to come back to England? I said, okay, I'll dare. Left everything behind and went.
Yes, yeah. And you say in the book, my heart was big, and the Floyd's music opened it further.
Yeah, it did.
What was it about, not so much about the music, but how did you feel your heart open further? Apart from being in love, what was happening in terms of you and how you saw reality and how you felt?
I think it's constantly being touched by this oneness through the music, and then my creativity was opening up. And whenever you touch your own creativity of your soul process, though I would never have called it then that, I was just discovering something that later I would know that I had the soul of an artist, and I had to live that.
Did you find when they made different albums that affected you in terms of your own feelings?
Yeah. I mean, the group were very much a gestalt. And as time progressed, everyone had their relationship, their family, their children, and all of that started to integrate. And the fame started to affect us as well, having to have synonyms. Is that the right word for fake names?
Yeah, synonyms, yeah.
And I know Dave and I struggled to stay human, and when Dark Side of the Moon brought in such fame, and we had an income coming in greater than what he wanted to put it in the bank. He didn't want to invest.
Mm-hmm.
But it was just getting so accelerated that they would invest. So it was just something so different on the material level to be adjusted to. I thought I was going to be a chemical engineer or an actress, and because I could do both, and suddenly here I am, a rock and roll wife.
Yes.
And living a growing life of fame in a material world. But the Floyd saved me so many times. Just their music, what would happen in the audience for me, was more than, I loved the Rolling Stones and Deep Purple and stuff, but the Floyd had a more ethereal experience for me, which opened up a door for me to live.
Can you talk more about that?
We are more than this physical body, and we're more than our possessions. And though our possessions were increasing at the time, there was something else that called us, that they stood for, and I stood for. But it was unspeakable in a way. We weren't on a noticeable spiritual path at the time. But there were qualities of being human that we stood for. And that, for me, means that we have to value more than this physical universe that we think is our personal reality. There's your emotions, and there's your mind, and there's the soul, and then there's so much more, the God realm beyond that, that we have created a very small box most people live in. And they're not happy. They're striving, longing, and I was being fulfilled without realizing it.
So you had all this material success, all the trappings, you had
it grew to be
fame.
that, yes. But we all, David and I particularly, even most of the Floyd kept it more simple. We didn't go out on the yachts and buy the horses.
But you were realizing, despite the fact you had this success, if you like, on different levels, that there was still something else that was important.
Yeah, at first it was very much the human values. And then as my life progressed, I realized that there was the soul and that I wanted to dedicate my personality to humanity. But I had to develop all the different levels so that my personality could do what God led me to do as a messenger. I didn't realize it was going to be an angle grinder up a stepladder carving a 10-foot angel, but I'm very happy for that.
So something quite significant happened in 1977. There's a lot in your book. It's 600 pages, so I have to kind of dive in and out in terms of pulling out what we can talk about in a finite time in an interview. You woke up one morning, you'd been obviously touring, you had, by that time, was it 2 or 3 children by that time, 1977?
Just one.
One, okay. But you were exhausted and you were paralysed, you had this pain, you're paralysed from the waist down. Mm-hmm. That must have been pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it was, to wake up and not feel that you could move out of the bed.
Yes.
Mm. Do you want me to tell you more?
What happened? What did you do?
I cried and shook David. I said, I can't move. I can't move. When we were on tour, Snowy White, the second guitarist's wife, had been healed of a woman problem by a Indian Ayurvedic doctor called Dr. Sharma in London. So I just said, Dave, we have to see this man. Please, can you find him? So he finally organized an appointment, and we went. I had seen a physiotherapist that helped reduce the pain, and my doctor had given me some painkillers so that I could actually manage to get there. And Dr. Sharma put me away into his naturopathic hospital for several weeks, and David took care of Alice. And he said that when we went to Hawaii between the southern and the northern tour, just previous to this, and we were on Kauai, and it was so beautiful, and both of us nearly didn't come back because it was just precious. That the aloha spirit is really love, and we didn't want to leave it. And the children were amazing in their parties and so beautiful, and the light was within, just shining around them and things. And so we came back. But what we had chosen to do was stop eating meat. I chose to stop drinking alcohol and taking any marijuana or cocaine or anything that was there, though we always only did it a little. And what happened was that I was detoxing. Mm. So that my kidney and liver and spleen, my whole body was like, ah! All this poison was being released, and it spasmed. So Dr. Sharma put me on chamomile tea and grapefruit for a while.
It's a fairly restricted diet, isn't it?
Very. And I had shiatsu and other massages and things, and he gave me lots of different homeopathic remedies and things. And I discovered meditation, and it started to, it was a spiritual signpost, for sure.
Yeah. Mm. And how was meditation to start with? Did that come easily for you?
No, it took me years to be able to do that, to do it properly. But it was the silence. I would sit in front of the window watching the rain in the pine forest, the drops of the beautiful raindrops and things, and just sat in silence more than anything. I see now that it was a meditation, but not a conscious one like I do now.
And the question, who am I, came up for you at that time, didn't it?
It did, yeah. One of my therapists introduced me to the teachings of Ramana Maharishi, and that's one of the questions he asks, who am I? Dr. Sharma also followed Ramana Maharishi.
It's a great question, isn't it? Who am I?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What happens if I ask you, who am I now? If I ask you, who are you now?
I think I'm getting a better idea of that. I've gone through a lot of phases to answer that question. Now I would say that I am a child of God, and I bring a messenger of beauty. I still have a long way to go to perfect it, though.
Can be a long journey, can't it, sometimes?
Well, Cecil Collins, my art teacher, said he'd sooner be a man on a journey and a vision than not.
Yeah.
And that's what I feel.
You went to, I'm just pulling out things out of the book that I found interesting. You went to a lecture by Sir George Trevelyan, and you hugged him, and then you had quite an experience, didn't you?
Yeah. He was a very elegant man. I didn't know much about him, but that therapist, Michael, said, come. David was away, so he said, come and meet Sir George and come to his lecture. Again, I was still quite the novice. And there he was, this very elegant English man. And Michael introduced me, and he came to hug me. And during that hug, it was like I was transported into a universe. I was traveling in the stars. I'd never had that experience before, even on LSD. It was so real, and he pulled me apart and shook me to bring me back because he knew I was out of my body. And then years later, I met him again and told him about it. And he says, what I love about this England in this time period is that I can hug beautiful women and get away with it.
Yeah. And did those kind of experiences, did they stay with you in terms of, I don't mean all the time you felt like that, but did they stay with you in terms of they somehow changed your outlook on how you saw things?
I would say I was evolving and transforming, but it's transforming sounds like you just go into some incredible change of who you are. For me, it's like I built on, I expanded my reality, and that's what we are. You know, you have this physical body and the emotions and the mind and that personality vehicle, and then as you start to expand, and I came up with this word refinement. I was refining who I was. You're expanding, but you're getting so gentle and kind and wise and precious. That's what it feels like has happened to me. And I discovered that's what I am. That's who I am. Those qualities.
Wise and precious are nice words. You don't often hear them in the word precious in spiritual circles, but it is, that's right.
We are.
Very precious about life, yeah.
Yeah, we all are.
Human spirit.
The heart is so pure, really. It's a gift that's in here. It's not something you have to search for or work for. You just have to be it, feel it.
Yes.
And all these experiences have brought me closer and closer to knowing that's what it is, that's what I am, that's what we are.
Yes. And amazingly, you had this period where you had some financial troubles and you had to go into tax exile for a time.
Yes, we did.
And then you found some very special places to meditate then, didn't you, I think?
Yeah.
The hidden Zen temple when you were...
when they were working on the... Hang on a minute.
It was 77.
Yeah. We were... Where did we go? We went to Lindos, and then we went to LA.
anyway, you found, I think
Special places with
that's something I
nature.
picked up from the book, that you like to find special places to meditate, and you were very good at doing that somehow.
Yes, yes. The communion with nature became very special moments, particularly when the Floyd were doing the Wall album. They were having such conflicts and such difficulty. And I was pregnant with my second child. And I would go out and walk amongst the mimosa and the dewdrops, and found this amazing, up where we were staying in south of France, this like almost Grand Canyon was before me after coming through the pine trees. And there it was. And all the pine trees on the side of the cavern were like bonsai. And so every day I would sit there, and I was wanting silence and talk to my baby, and loved David when I saw him, and prayed for him and the Floyd.
See, what's coming across to me is that actually you were trying to lead quite a simple life in a world that was actually quite a crazy world you were living in.
David very much is like that too in his nature.
He wants to live a simple life, you mean?
He always went for a more simple situation.
Yes, yeah.
If he had the chance, yeah.
And that was one of the bonds that kept you together, I guess, yeah. But it's so difficult when you're living at that level to find simplicity.
Yes.
You want to say more about that, or?
No, ask another question.
Okay. So, in 1983, you met Irena Tweedie.
Yes.
And I think you met her because you were doing Alexander lessons, and then you discovered her book, Chasm of Fire.
Yes.
And again, I pulled out from the book, the first time you met her, you knew there was that a truly great being stood in front of you.
I had this Alexander lesson and saw the book and asked Diane, who is this? And she said she gives meditation. It's not classes, it was just you can come and meditate with her and discuss dreams. And I said, oh, when is it? Where is it? She says, well, it's up in northern London and you have to find your own way there. So it took me a little while, with having 3 children by then, to get it together, running houses and everything that I had to do to get to her. And the day that I came to her, I went to knock on the door and she opened it before I knocked. And she said, come in, we've been waiting for you.
And she didn't know you were coming? Or not in an obvious
no
way?
No, but I've read since that lots of spiritual teachers know this, often. I had that one.
And when you said that there's this special being stood in front of you, what was so special about her? What did you feel that was so different?
First off, she was very radiant. She had light around her, and there was this calmness, and yet there was a wisdom. She could look straight into you and know who you are, but she wouldn't hurt you. She was a guide. Again, that was still something very new. I can articulate that now, but then it was just happening.
Yeah.
And I just felt at home. Everyone was lying down on the floor. She said, forget all that sitting in lotus and all that, just lie on the floor. So that's what we did. A lot of people snored, but still.
And she would give talks and answer questions?
Part of it was, first we'd meditate, and then we would tell dreams. She would ask dreams, she would interpret them, have other people interpret them. I remember one day she said, Ginger, come here. She had 2 black comfy chairs, and she had me sit there. And a lot of people were very envious whenever someone was gifted to sit in this chair. And she sometimes would look at whoever was sitting there, in this case it was me, and start almost telling you off, what you should be doing. And it was like, that's not me. What is she talking about? But I learned that she would talk to someone, or they talk to the floor so the door will listen. So somebody in that room had this situation, but if she went straight to that person wouldn't get it and would go into defense, perhaps. So she wanted that person to listen, so she would say whatever it was to the person in the chair.
And what did you feel you got from her? Okay, there was the space to meditate and it was very relaxed, but what did you get practically in terms of your own development and education from her?
I learned to love being here. She sat me down once and said, Ginger, you and I have something very much in common. And I said, what? And she says, I didn't want to be here first either. So and then it was like, the more that I discovered who I was, the less fear would control me or false desires. I had a quest. Take years to build that strength to where you could be in the middle of the storm and still feel joy.
That's a bit of a key, isn't it? If you can be in the middle of the storm and feel joy, you really are.
Yeah.
You really are sorted in one way in terms of living, especially our crazy modern living.
Yes, yes. What I have found in my own journey that, in regards to that, as I touched more of my soul purpose, and also that expansion beyond the physical personality, you become even more sensitive to the storm. You go through different phases where you, there are denizens out there, and you have to learn how to, what I'm finding, the more that I focus as God's messenger, the less, it's not just the storm of the world, there's something that tries to stop mankind from touching the greatness that we can be. And you start to have a different experience with life, that you have to learn how to be that warrior and still hold love. But love is very strong, but it's a matter of getting to what that is. And when I was meditating before, the reason why I wrote this book is because one of my teachers came to me in the night while I was meditating and said, Ginger, you must write your story of love.
Yes.
And it took me a couple of years before I said yes to doing it.
So just to go back to Mrs. You call her Mrs. Tweedie a lot in the book. So she said she'd met 3 enlightened people in her lifetime: her teacher Guruji, one she wasn't prepared to name, and Cecil Collins. And she suggested you go and spend some time with Cecil Collins.
Yes, to join his classes.
What was he like?
A character.
Yes.
Yes. He used to sit in the back. He had a hump, and he always wore a tweed coat with a little vest, and he had these little glasses, and he looked like a bird that was really watching you. And one day I came into the class bouncing on with my American spirit, and he ducks. And he says, Ginger, one day you will have a real smile on your face. And he put me through I was expert at doing little drawings, perfect, of the model. And it took him a while to finally break that, to where I remember the day that the blob appeared, where I let go, because I just could do it, no matter what position he put the glass in, or what you'd be painting with the left hand and with a brush of a different color on this hand, or you'd have it in your mouth and he'd be swirling you around within a certain minute. He'd be counting from 10 down. and I'd still have a perfect drawing.
Mm.
And the day that I finally let go started something new for me.
Because he talked about art could unlock the door.
Yes,
And it
yes,
was obviously helping to unlock your doors.
yes, we did.
Yeah. He also wanted you to catch the soul in its return to paradise.
Hmm.
Lovely thing to say too.
What that has come to mean for me is that when part of my soul nature is that I have to create. That's the gift that God gave me that I know now that I need to do for humanity as a service. And his lessons took me into a place where you're open to listen to the divine, so that what's born is what will be created, meant to be born from God for all of us.
Mm.
So that when you look at these images, and many of us are inspired to create from that viewpoint, or that experience really, on the subliminal level, the person touches that in themselves because they know that it's real. And everyone's got it, except they don't realize it. And we need to create new images to be looking at. Part of the spiritual process, it's really important what images you look at, what you think, what you do. What are you creating just walking down the street?
Mm. And it reminds me that, I should have said this at the beginning, that in your book there's lots of wonderful images, which I can't show now because we can't move the cameras, but we'll put some images at the end of the programme.
Mm-hmm.
And you also, I didn't know you when I ordered the book, but I got these wonderful images, you know, some with you and David, and you and David there, and one with you now.
Yeah.
So image is very important to you.
To all of us.
Yes.
It does affect us.
Yes.
And we don't realize how much it affects us.
Yes. So you entered a spiritual crisis.
I did.
And
Do you want me to tell you about it?
yeah.
Okay. Sadly, David and I separated, chose to separate. And what we were living was so much a dream come true for me. And with my spiritual path and discovery that I was an artist and I was being so fulfilled doing that. And suddenly it all just changed, stopped. And we had a house on the Thames, and I was sitting by the river, and I couldn't go on. I didn't know how to go on. And then suddenly I heard the kids in the garden. They were just home from school. And I was about to jump in the river.
Wow.
And they don't realize, and they might, once they read the book, if they ever do, that they saved their mom that day.
Yeah.
Just their laughter in the garden.
It's a very human thing from your own children.
Yeah, I love them.
Yeah. Yeah. And you had 4 children by this time.
I did, yes, 4 of them.
Yeah.
Matthew was 3 at the time,
Yeah.
a little guy.
Yeah. And I'm just reading again quotes from your book. You sent a message to Mrs. Tweedie, and she said, "One day you and love will take the place of all your fears."
But she also said that Guruji told her that one day, Irena, you will not need love in the same way ever.
Okay.
I didn't know what that really meant, but I'm getting an idea now.
Yeah.
It's the universal uniting principle that holds everything together. Even every molecule is held by love. But it's beyond the personal love that we all desire, and even the love of the mobile phone or all the things. I mean, I'm always joking about shoes and coats will be the last thing I surrender before enlightenment. But really, you know, there's this aspect of surrender. I've always been contemplating what that really meant. And what I've discovered is that At the moment, the surrender is really surrendering to what is your sole purpose. And then all of that emotions and mind and your body, your daily living, I call it the art of living, is a tool dedicated to the highest by whatever name is sent to you to call it. And it's not, a lot of people panic. It's like, oh my God, you know, I won't be able to have a coat again because I'm on a spiritual path. It's not like that. Even wearing makeup, it's a matter of, do you wear makeup to put on a mask, or do you do it to empower the beauty of who you are, the shining that comes out of your eyes?
So I want to try and get a bit more of your story in. And one time you were in New York and you had a session with Dr. Wenger, Engel, who was head of the New York Jungian Society. And that started again a very important new phase of your life, didn't it?
It did. Mrs. Tweedie had written her second book, and Dr. Engel had said he would write her preface.
Yes.
Yeah. So she said, I know you're going on tour to New York City. Can you take the book to Dr. Engel? And I said, certainly. So I called Dr. Engel up, and he says, yes, Engel here. And I said, Mrs. Tweedie's asked for me to bring her book to you. Yes, can you come, you know, 10 o'clock, rock and roll, 10 o'clock in the morning in New York City. Okay, I'll be there. So he had a flat very near to where John Lennon had his flat. And it had a very long corridor. A lovely lady answered the door. And the corridor was so long, and it was filled with different pictures and diplomas, but I was more interested in the bookshelf down the end, so I was looking at the different titles and things until finally he comes out, and he had one monocle, and he brought me into this room. It was like something out of Bell Book and Candle. The aspidestra, the lace curtains, the books and the manuscripts piled up on this huge desk, and we sat in these two chairs there. And he said, did you see all my diplomas on the wall? I said, yes, but I didn't look at them. I was more interested in your book, Dr. Engel. Why? And he says, I'm a marriage counselor. And I said, oh, that's really nice. He says, well, if you ever need me, call me. And of course, at that point, I didn't have any idea that
This is before it broke up, yeah.
Yeah, long before not long, it was the Animals tour. But what was special about him, that meeting at that point, was he said, Ginger, I have this wish to understand how rock and roll music affects the psyche of the person going to the concerts. Do you think you could, can you help me with that? I said, well, I think I could do that. You know, when are you available? Because we were in town for 4 days. So I sent a car for him and brought him in through the bowels of Madison Square Garden. And he came before the audience came in, and we walked around, and he was fascinated about everything. And all the engineers and everybody was just amazed that it wasn't just Haley Mills or, you know, Mick Jagger, famous people coming in, philosophers and Tibetan lamas and spiritual people. Mrs. Tweedie came to the concert in London.
Yeah.
So they were in awe that these people were coming. Anyway, at the end, backstage, he said, Ginger, I don't know if you would agree with me, but that place that we seek to reach in meditation, your husband's group does that for their audience. And that's what I mean. That's what always touched me. It was being acknowledged by a very wise person. But most of all, they create harmony out of transforming chaos.
Transforming chaos into beauty.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, of course, took you back to your experience at the first Floyd gig all those years ago when you met David.
And every
the
Floyd
harmony.
gig, when
Yeah.
that happened, it happened so many times.
Yes.
Mm.
Even though there was disharmony at times with the band members, somehow
Mm-hmm.
it comes together.
Mm-hmm.
I remember I did an interview with Jenny Boyd, who previously, I think you probably knew her actually, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she wrote a book called It's Not Only Rock and Roll, and she interviewed lots of musicians very much about where their creative genius came from and what it was like to be on stage. And she would talk about there might be differences in the band, but they get on stage and they get into a certain zone,
Mm-hmm.
and there's a togetherness there, and that really reverberates around the audience, this togetherness,
Mm-hmm.
and brings everybody closer and gives everybody a taste of the experience of the oneness that actually we're all seeking and don't know it some of the
And we
time.
could each find it in our various ways if we
Yes.
open to what our individual soul purpose is.
Yes.
And mine's through art and the
Yeah,
art
yeah.
of living.
Yeah. And Dr. Engel's also told you when you were having the sessions on the phone and you were in difficulties with your marriage, that you're breaking through, not breaking down.
Mm-hmm.
That must have been very helpful when he explained that
That
to
was
you.
amazing.
Yeah.
When I got back to England, I took him up on his offer. It was before Skype, so we'd do phone calls. I would call him in New York from England. And I had sessions. I was being analysed on the phone. And I would share different dreams with him. And that's when he said, Ginger, you are breaking through, not breaking down.
Mm.
And to be able to hold this larger process in my mind, to this day, helps a lot.
Mm.
And I quote him a lot.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And then he recommended you meet somebody face to face. You started to have sessions with Gerhard Adler,
Mm-hmm.
who was a colleague of his in London. And the thing that I wrote down, again from your book, which I really loved, was the first session. You don't remember actually what you talked about, but you remember the stillness of his listening.
Yeah. It was really special. I was really nervous when he said, I think you need to speak to my good friend Gerhard Adler. You need someone to sit with
Yes.
and go through this so that you don't break down, that you break through
Yes.
and realize that there's a bigger process that you're going through right now to do with your soul being born. So I finally got the courage to call him, and he answered the phone and he said, Gerhard here. They always did that. Engel here, Gerhard here. And I said, Dr. Engel said I should come see you. He always does that. He did he? Okay. Can you come tomorrow at 7:30 in the morning? Oh my God. So I went, and there was that. The stillness in the room was very, very special,
Yeah.
and his eyes.
And that, this comes up a lot on Conscious TV, the importance of listening.
Mm-hmm.
And that has changed so many people's lives. They've been with someone that's just able to listen to them.
Also, what I want to share with you is that Sting wrote a article, which I can send to you, called The Silence in Music.
Mm.
And he says that for him, he listens to the space between the notes.
Yes.
And that is the same for us. There is a space between our breaths and the listening, the silence, and the word. And that's what Gerhard Adler helped me to understand and feel.
Yeah. And then one day you went for a session.
Yes.
You knocked at the door.
Yes, and Mrs. Adler answered, who I'd never met before, and said, Ginger, Gerhard passed over in the night. You would have never known that he was ready to pass over in our sessions. Same with Dr. Engel. He was in pain in his legs, and you'd never know it.
Mm.
And she said that Gerhard and I had discussed who of his clients I might be best for me to take on, and I'm happy to take you on in the new year after we've finished everything of his passing over, if you so choose. And I just stood there and it was raining. I said, okay, we'll do that. And I started with her.
How was she different from him in terms of her work?
I could lay down on the couch. She brought me into, how can I say this? She helped me with dealing with David and I separating a lot.
Mm.
She had me see someone called Dr. Rossi, who dealt with the Erickson Institute, and he did a type of hypnotherapy, relatively new then. And she said, Ginger, there aren't any personal one-to-one appointments left, but he's doing this special demonstration before all the Jungians in London. Would you like to be his guinea pig? And I said, okay, I'd like to give it a go. That was really an amazing experience.
Mm.
First off, my psyche didn't want to go there. I got lost going to Mrs. Adler's house and then on to this special place where they were holding it. And I had to pull the car over and say, listen, this is going to be a really good thing for us. We need to go and have this experience. Can you please let me figure out where we are and get us there so we're not late? And suddenly the psyche changes, and suddenly I could figure out the A to Z. I could even see it. And we go off. And I get in there, and I'm sitting there, and he starts to talk to me and talk about going into a fog and allowing an image to come. And each time, once I would express a certain image, he would then, after a while, say, are you okay? And if I wasn't, I'd say no or yes. And if it was a no, he would take me back into being present. What eventually came, because I was really, my heart was palpitating at one point, and the vision that arose was that I was this little being crawling on a busy street in the city, large wheels, just seeing lots of feet up to the knees, and I was crying. And some man picked me up and took me somewhere up these stairs into a room, an empty room, as I recalled in this experience, and started to kiss me on the face. I was screaming, and he drops me, and as he's running out the door, he kicks me in the stomach by accident and leaves. And suddenly a woman comes up hearing this baby crying and picks me up and takes me to the police station as a lost child. And within my father's side of the family, they always joked about the time somehow I got to the other side of Philadelphia in the police station when I was little. My mother never heard that story. They were already separated and all, but it was fascinating to realize that, because up to that point, whenever David and I, if I sense that, or with anybody, if anyone was upset with me, I would get a kick in the stomach. And after seeing that, it transformed, it stopped happening.
Interesting. I'm looking at the clock. I mean, I had so much time left, and I want to just cover a couple of things quickly, if that's okay. another dream which you had, which I thought was quite significant, I'm sure you did as well, was the dream about Mrs. Tweedie, about the end of your relationship with her. Just briefly
Briefly,
tell
we
us
were in
about
Hawaii. I
Yeah.
had this dream. She said there are 4 types of dreams. One of them is the teacher comes and teaches to you.
Yes.
And she came to me and she talked and talked and talked and talked and talked, and then said, you don't have to come back to see me. I've told you everything you need to know and to work on. So I didn't go back to see her for 6 months because I wasn't quite sure whether that was true or not. And it was. She just acted as though I didn't exist. So I've gone out into the world on my own.
It's extraordinary, isn't it? You go back, you were very close to her in one way, and then she acts as though you don't exist. But I guess that, as you say, that was her way of teaching and communicating, and she was communicating in different ways. And then I also wanted just to very briefly talk about something you watched on television, the 2nd of July 2005. It was the Floyd reunion after so many years, and unfortunately we didn't have the time today to talk about how the wall affected so many things in terms of your relationship and the band. But the Floyd reunion, there was something very touching for you, wasn't there?
David he was really hurt by Roger. And
Roger Waters, yes.
Roger Waters, yeah.
Yeah.
And Bob Geldof had called him and said, David, would you do the concert? I'm not fucking doing this concert. Pardon. Bob used that word a lot.
Yeah.
And he said, can I come see and talk to you about it? So he goes to talk to him and he says, I'm not going to do that. You know, I'll never get together with that guy. Bob gets in the car and says, come on. He says, no. And he says, think about it. And eventually, Roger, who had already said yes, said, well, Bob, how'd you get on? And he says, it's a no. So Roger says, give me his current phone number, I'm calling him. And so Dave said yes. And I sat in the kitchen while my kids were down in the front of the stage and everything, texting me, telling me all who was there and what was happening, and I'm watching the whole concert through the day, and finally the Floyd come on, and David's like really stubborn, and Roger's being softer than ever, and I just said, come on, Dave, let go, be what you were when you were young, when you were first with the Floyd. And by the time they got to Comfortably Numb, which to me is the most moving song that he ever played, he let go.
Yeah.
And it was just magic. That is the best, because that song, for all the difficulty of the wall and the intensity of the anger and everything in that music that David and Rick helped to transform, Comfortably Numb was the song that took us to the stars.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to read a quote from the end of your book just to finish the interview. I see it clearly now. It was a journey of return to God and to serve. Each day I now speak to him, my closest friend. It's lovely.
Thank you.
Ginger, I really enjoyed you being here.
Thank you.
Could have covered so much more, but it's the way it is. I'm going to show you your book again,
Memoirs.
Memories of the Bright Side of the Moon.
Yep.
And there are so many wonderful images in the book, and as I say, we'll try and show some of them at the end of the program if you're watching on the internet. And also now what we're going to do is we're going to invite Mick Collins in, who was a guest earlier today and also did a lot of Jungian work, also had some difficulties in his life. And we're going to have a discussion between Ginger, Mick, Renata, my wife, and myself. So if you're watching on the internet, you should be able to find this very easily. So thank you again, Ginger.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for watching Conscious TV.
Thank you.
And hopefully we see you again very soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. This is a kind of a special edition which we're adding on to the 2 interviews we've done with Mick Collins and Ginger Gilmour previously. We just thought it'd be interesting to go more in detail in their processes, partly through their Jungian work and their dream work, and generally how they integrated some very important and often very difficult experiences that happened with them. So they both have books. We have Mick's book, The Unselfish Spirit, and Ginger's book, Memories of the Bright Side of the Moon. So we have Mick Collins, Ginger Gilmour, Renata McNay, and myself. So you both had difficult times, which we've gone through before, and you both in the end had a lot of work with Jungian analysis. So Mick, let's start with you. Mm-hmm. When did you first realise how helpful the Jungian work was?
Well, I mean, I was drawn to the training, so I trained as a process. Well, I didn't complete my training, but I did process-oriented psychology for 9 years, and Arnie Mindell was a Jungian who set that up. But it's a very Jungian-based work, but it also adds in shamanism, Taoism, and things like that. It's a wonderful training, and I was drawn to that particular training through the books I'd read, and so I signed up for it. And so the whole path of taking your process seriously, your body symptoms, your dreams, your higher or altered states of consciousness, were all part of your growth and development. So for me, that phase, that was 96, I joined and went into that training. That then became so pivotal to pulling together all those threads that we'd spoke about in the previous session. So yeah, Jung became, although Mindell has formulated his own therapy approach, it was drawn very much from a Jungian perspective. So naturally, I read quite a bit of Jung as well. But that journey of entering into your process and thinking that there's a prospective function to it, that you're going forward, was really important. So that growth, individuation into wholeness became pretty much key for me.
You used those words before. Individuation into wholeness.
Yes.
And for you, Ginger, you kind of experienced the wholeness in a way before, hadn't you? You had, your history was, well, we documented before, went to a lot of Pink Floyd gigs, shall we say, and you experienced the wholeness there. And in the Jungian theory, it was your Jungian work, it was a way, maybe a way of working back towards that wholeness from your, how would you describe that?
Mrs. Tweedie, another teacher that you know I was with, said that often the individual is the last person to know what they have to do. And it was like actually, ever since I was little, I was in that experience. But then I had to come to a point to understand it, and then to know what my purpose was and how it was to manifest. I mean, even when I was little, I remember going out in the forest and being one with the animals and the little tiny riverets of water that on the building sites, and I'd play with the rocks and the pebbles and just in that world.
So it was more like you remembered.
I returned.
Times. You returned.
Yeah, Cecil Collins said that a paradise one is of greater value. So I had it, lost it, and came back with a greater understanding. And it was through the teachings of Jung and Mrs. Tweedie, Sufism, to then come and return to my Christian upbringing. It's all built the process of my awareness, my awakening, to then be committed to my work for humanity through the art of beauty.
So your first sessions with Wenger, Engel, what do you remember about them in terms of how much they helped you practically?
One is that it was timeless, and that being a grown-up, you could be be wise and be timeless. That was part of life. And he also made it acceptable for me in how to live it, consciously. You're looking at me as though I didn't finish explaining it. Do you want to know more?
Yeah.
Oh, God.
If you want to tell us more.
Well, I have to let it come. I think that our culture doesn't raise us to value the beauty of being human. And I feel that we have a purpose to care, guardians for life. And his wisdom, all the teachers that I've been graced to meet, show me how important it is to value that and to take on the sword of the warrior of heart. We have to do it, or we'll lose everything.
So Ginger, what does it mean for you being human?
What does it mean to be human? It means to totally accept that we're a being of love, of kindness, of goodness, that we cherish each other, that I cherish myself, that I'm kind to myself, that I accept who I am from a soul point of view. That's being human.
So we seem to be miles and miles away from that, being human.
And yet at the same time, it's there. It's there.
It's all, yeah.
It's. We just have veils in front of it. Someone, who was it? What teacher talked about the onion? That was the onion. You just peel the onion away. We have great resistance because we're being indoctrinated that reality is false, and that you lose everything in this world that we think is reality. But why don't we just change it into joy? Why are we going to the movies and watching murder? Why are we doing that? I choose to do it differently. My poor kids. One of the new Batman movies we went to, and I went in and it was like so dark. And I just got up and walked out. Mom, you can't do that. I said, yes, I can. I'm not sitting here and watching this. What's the point? Why should I do that? Life is challenging enough. Interestingly enough, she had heart palpitations at the end of the movie. I had to take her to ER.
Your daughter did? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
So Ginger, you had many experiences of who you are, and you saw the beauty within. And so you had pointers what to look for. And so many people, 99% of humanity never have an experience like that, or cannot understand if they have it. And that makes it probably so difficult to realize what a human being is and why are you here. Wouldn't you think so?
Yes, and I think we have, as visionaries, a lot of work to do to create images. You're doing it here, creating an image so that they see there is another reality. But more than that, it has to be bigger. The film industry has to start shifting. The television needs to shift. We need to understand how we're indoctrinating people and what are we indoctrinating them to think about life. Right now, it's scary for the reality they're putting out there. I know that the children that I have raised, what is their future? Atomic bombs? Pollution? Global warming? Whereas when I was leaving home, the scary bit was, can I do it? The world was my oyster. If I went for it, I believed in Abraham Lincoln, you know, we could do anything. Now it's like, even if they believe, if I encourage my children to believe in anything they put their mind to and find your soul purpose will happen, they still have to create that world there and know how to work in it.
So let's go back to Mick. So with your sessions that you had, you had the experience which we covered in the interview, your mind or energies were going way out of control, which Ginger is touching more on the global scale.
Yeah.
Things are going way out of any kind of comfort zone. So what were the practical things that helped you find grounding again in the understanding of the shadow? You mentioned the shadow a couple of times in your interview.
Well, I mean, I think that it was a composite of many things. Like when you're doing the work of integration, it's about your vocation, it's about your social connectedness and what you're doing in the world, in your community, not only in the greater world, and then coming more inward. So within, so I'd say, what are you doing in your job? What are you doing with your friends and social relatedness? Then in here, I found working with my dreams, body symptoms. I had the most incredible body symptoms that were happening. I remember one of my big toes was permanently up, and I just used to think, well, why is it doing that? And I didn't realise that somewhere in me, I was holding that up. And I remember a friend of mine who's a craniosacral therapist, I said, oh, look at my toe. And he went, it's a very interesting one, isn't it? And I think he wanted to get the work on it. In fact, we spoke about, this was 20 odd years ago, we spoke about this the other day. So it'd be doing body work. What is it that's holding all that up, all that energy? So being attentive to things like that, where your dreams are pushing you to the edges of your known personality and beyond. So sometimes archetypes popping up, these figures or situations that are universal, which somehow the human heritage has created in our collective trajectory. So for instance, I remember one dream of a wizard throwing a ball of light into my solar plexus, and I went into this incredible state. But interesting, the solar plexus and the light, you start thinking about a wizard as a transformer. And so there's that whole sense of that it's not only figures, but it's process, and then what body experiences you're having. So those become for me quite numinous and very tangible, not theoretical, but lived experiences. So as Ginger was speaking, two things. When you were speaking about the pebbles and the water, I started to get very affected by that, and I felt a real sense of something coming over me, which felt incredible, actually, very warm and soulful. And it made me look at the water and the shimmering light in the glass of water. And I think now I'm just touching into a bit of numinosity as I'm here. So it's not only something that's magical and fantastical and larger than life, it's subtle and delicate and opening, and brings a sense of soul and journey. So for me, that's what my sessions were about, was about really connecting. And I think what Ginger was saying about where are we going as a society? And, I share a similar view. Why aren't we giving our children the most incredible, exquisite experiences of what it is to be alive and have a soulful connection to learning? As much as I love science, I've worked in a scientific faculty for 10 years. I think that needs to be extended to something a bit more whole and not so rational and reductive. So for me, there's these very tangible things about really entering into these experiences and being opened by them and working with their potential. So being in potentia, in growth, in movement.
You have 2 children, Mick.
I have one.
Oh, you have one?
Yes, the gorgeous Rosie.
Okay, how do you give Rosie these values?
she's amazing.
Without putting her off.
Yeah, no, I never do that. We've got a national shrine to Mary where I live, and it's the national shrine of England. It's called Walsingham, and it's the sacred feminine and it's in a little village. Nobody knows about it, but there is also an old temple to Minerva, and underneath that there would have been a temple to Sulis, the Celtic goddess. It's actually layers of the goddess in the UK, and it's the most beautiful place. Anyway, I used to take her there for tea a lot, not for any indoctrination purposes, because I used to like going there, and we'd have tea and cake together. And subsequently, over the years, she will just come out with the most divine statements and say, well, you know, if there was something like God, and off she goes. And, you know, we'd have these wonderful conversations. And she's a real explorer in her own way, which is quite magical, really. So I've tried not to layer anything, but she'll often come with a dream and just say, can I just run this by you? And I think, well, I'm no expert, really. I believe you will know the answer to your own dreams. But I said, what do you make of that bit? What do you make of that bit? And how did that feel? And we have a conversation. And she's really good at it, you know, she does that. Yeah, so I think it's conversational, it's relatedness. It's not, I don't like, oh, let's do this now. It's more living, related.
Organic.
Yeah.
Yes.
They
yes.
absorb it.
Yeah.
They see the truth of who you are all the time. And until they have their own path as well. As a parent, I know that you have to come to a point of letting them walk their path. And hopefully you've done your best to live the qualities that bring the best for them, but they still have to go out there and find their way. And I'm always on call, you know. But I can only, now they're grown up, I just plant seeds. They have to find their way and put the water on it, you know. And I pray a lot.
Lovely.
And do you still look at your own dreams quite a bit?
No.
That process is finished for you in a way?
No, they come and go. I have a way of looking at them as an educational aspect, but I don't purposely write my dreams down every night like I used to. Because I went on to discover that I'm a visionary. And if Rudolf Steiner said there are three groups of people. There is the leaders, the workers, and the visionaries. And the visionaries bring forth concepts and new ideas for the leaders to pick up, pass on to the workers, and they then spread it all around. Unfortunately, we find that the employees and the leaders are butting each other, and they don't value each other. But ultimately, it's the visionaries that they don't see the importance of that. And the whole aspect of being a visionary is that you work through the top three centers. Now I just talk to God directly, but there was a period of time where I focused on the top three centers, where I would see through and received, particularly at night before I'd go to sleep. It's called conscious sleeping. That just before you go to sleep, there's a flash, and you can enter in that space, the God realm. Whereas when I was developing the dream process, I was finding that it was coming in through my solar plexus predominantly, and you can run the risk of being a medium as opposed to bringing in higher messages. So I dared to let go of that emphasis. You just have to dare when you go into refinement. You can't get hooked on anything. You sort of build and spread it out, and you become a big puzzle of all these special things, like a pie, you know. And that's what I do now, having gone through practicing that and talking to God in whatever name people tend to talk to. and whatever name they're given, I personally work through the Christ and now, and the love aspect of it. And I've had experiences where he appeared before me, and I can't deny that. That is, and he guides me. And I talk about the more that you spend time on the divine principle in whatever name that you do relate to, it will build up, and that's what we have. The problem is we've left that because of the wars of religion. It's the separation that religion has brought in has undermined the essence of what they stand for. And some of the fundamentalists, even the atheists that are fundamentalists, we need to bring in the divine and the sacred again and care. And that will balance it off. We don't have to try very hard, and with my children, that's what they see. My love for the lilies, for whatever, the silence. I don't push on them anymore. Of course, I was a vegetarian and I didn't want meat in the house for a phase of their life. I stopped drinking alcohol, so alcohol wasn't allowed in the house. But they used to steal it out of the basement where the old wine was kept. And one of them, I was about to take her back to boarding school, and she's about to get in the car, and suddenly, smash! It slipped from under her coat, and she's like a dog in the headlights. Oh no, she caught me. But I didn't even drink coffee. And I went to Florence with one of my children who was studying Italian there. And we're walking down the street, and I finally thought, hey, it's one of my favorite smells. I'm going to have an espresso. You don't get to Florence very often. And you should have seen the look on her face. Mom, you're drinking coffee? Yeah, I think it's important sometimes, but I'm serious in my commitment of goodness and beauty and things like that. But when you build a box and you're following it, is your box got a lid to you expanding, or are you suffocating?
Are dreams still significant to you?
They are. I think I go with what Ginger said. I've got a very strong connection to Jesus. I'm not a Christian, but I've got a strong connection to Jesus and angels. Particularly inspired by the work that we've got these helpers, guides with us. And so, but the dreams play into that. I work those. I see. I mean, in Sufism, I think Henry Corbin said the dream is an angel. So it's the imagination, the imaginal is coming through, and in a way, I mean, these are just ways of framing things, which may or may not be helpful. But I sort of try and work with the inspiration as it comes. I try not to get overly analytical about dreams. I try to look for where there's a kind of numinosity in them. So, where there's something that I was telling Renata when we were having tea, a dream that still figures quite strongly is of dreaming of a font with 3 priests and monks, can't quite work out what they were, around the font, and a young boy, about 10 years old, pouring sand into the font. But the sand moves clockwise of its own volition and forms into the most beautiful droplet of liquid. And then I had this explosion of just bliss and that came upon me in the dream state. I woke up in it and then it faded. I didn't get the 2 days like I had in the last experience. But to me, that felt like an angel. That was angelic. Because it then made me think, so where I value Jung in this, there's a mandala, there's a baptismal font, but there's 4 points in it. He talks about the quadrated circle as a symbol of self and wholeness, self with a capital S. So that dream for me would almost be, well, not almost, was a dream of really stepping into and connecting to something higher, and also to me as an individual growing. So yeah, they are important, but not in that, oh, I wonder if this is just part of my complex with mum or dad or whoever, or my wife or whatever. I try not to do that, but I'm looking for it as its higher appeal to growth. Yeah.
So you think through the Jungian work you did and the dream analysis, you worked pretty much through your unconscious?
Yes, and of course the collective unconscious, everyone would think, oh, well, that's just stuff that's underneath that we're not sure about. But I see that as all around, not under, as a field. And so for me that, I mean, there's a lovely saying, I'll say it, the unconscious isn't unconscious, it's just that consciousness is unconscious of what the unconscious is conscious of.
Yep.
So in a way, it's doing something to you. It brings a divinity in there. It's not only psychological. And I think that me and Ginger were just mentioning before the camera rolled that Jung was very, very keen on this numinosity, this numinous spark, being the real point of Jungian therapy, not only the resolution of a neuroses. So there's something about that, touching into that numinosity.
I don't think you find a resolution for neuroses without including it.
Yeah.
That's what their premise is. Well, particularly Mrs. Adler worked in that way.
I agree.
So what is numinosity?
Aha.
It's a good question.
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, you know, the classic thing is describe enlightenment, isn't it? You run the risk of putting yourself in a difficult position. But if we go with Rudolf Otto was a theologian, professor of theology, and went around the world looking at different spiritual religious traditions, theistic, polytheistic, shamanistic, and noted that they all seemed to be describing something that was very similar when they spoke about the sacred or the divine. And so he sort of thought, well, there's this sort of wholeness in that. There isn't all these divisions and separations. Actually, there is something that binds us, and he called it the numinous, to give it that freedom from any one tradition, if you wish. And it ties into a mystery. It comes with grace. You can't manipulate it. It comes, maybe you're washing the dishes and it comes into you or around you, and it is very much connecting with the divine spark within us, so our soul connects with that. I think it's a beautiful thing, actually, and I really thank Jungian analysis, because Jung really did bring that forward in a very practical way through dreams and just, archetypes.
So you both worked a lot with dreams, spend a lot of time in your dreams. And it is said that this life is a dream as well. So how do you know what's the real?
Well, might ask you that question. I don't know, what do you think, Ginger?
What's the reference point? Where are we?
Yeah.
I don't seek to find out if one is a dream, fantasy, or real, because for me the imagination is a dream. It is a place that I live. Though at the same time, some traditions say that everything's an illusion, and when I heard that, I said, okay, do I get to choose my illusion? So I choose my illusion, and if it's to be happy and smile and create and play with clay or laugh in the garden or something, we're creators of our reality. And if that's all a dream, I'll keep it.
I'd like to, we need to finish in a few minutes, I'd like to just talk about something that we didn't in interview with you, Ginger. There's a documentary called Matter of the Heart, which you talked about, which we watched. It's actually on YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube, anyone can. And it's a documentary about Carl Jung. And there it was important for you because you understood, or started to understand for the first time, the shadow collective unconsciousness, which you hadn't quite grasped before. You did touch on this earlier, but do you want to talk about more about that? Maybe both Mick can comment on that as well.
You know how I was talking about building up a box, a structure that you work from, interpreting life and things. Well, I started getting one about anger and not being able to confront, or even some days not liking myself. But that whole, I was so determined that I had to be happy, I had to meditate, I was focusing on, and a friend would say, "You're not looking at your shadow." Well, I went, forget it, I don't need my shadow, I'm going to build up the importance of what we focus on. And I want to focus on the highest and work that way. And I'm still like that, but I went through a period that finally it was like, watching that, I went, I can accept that, what Carl Jung talked about the shadow. It isn't what other people thought the shadow was, or what I had thought the shadow was. And how important it is to recognize what lies within as well as without, and blend it together, accept it. And it wasn't the anger of my mom when I wasn't behaved myself, because I put anger right out the door. I thought, I'm not doing that. But then it would happen, it'd show up, and I couldn't accept it. But I can see that there's a point to certain aspects of that to work with, it being human.
And on a more collective basis, the collective unconscious.
Well, we're certainly going through it.
It seems to be happening in so many ways at the moment, and people complain about Putin or Donald Trump, but I think
Can I share a story with you
Stories
in
are great.
regards to this? We always go to Lindos on the island of Rhodes in Greece, and I am considered a dolphin. I swim across this bay backwards and forwards. And we were there in August, the kids were playing on the beach, the tourists were maxed out, and they were making so much noise, and just pushing into each other, and it was so, I couldn't handle it, so I thought, I'm going out for a swim. So I go out for a swim, and I'm lying there, and suddenly I hear this most wonderful angelic sound, and I'm just blissed out with the warmth of the sun and the body on the water and floating there hearing this, and I suddenly realized the reason why they're acting like that is because they don't know how to deal with the fact that all this high energy is coming down. And this is their way of dealing with that degree of wonderful energy and sound coming to them. They're unconscious, and but they're getting it. And I really think that we've heard so much that the planet and humanity is at a pinnacle point where we have a choice. We can go break down, or we can go out. And the reason why is that consciousness, the energy of consciousness, is coming down on us big time. And we have a choice which way we're going to go with it. And often, just before a pus ball were to heal, it has to explode and all. And we need people that are very conscious and awake of how to help and guide the breaking down so it's a breaking through.
Yeah, I agree with that. And for me, the shadow, just putting it in that Jungian terms, I mean, Jung said that 80% of the shadow is pure gold. So straight away, all we're dealing with is something that's disavowed and marginalised. It's not bad. We've all got one, and it's quite healthy to go with it. The thing that I think we're in at the moment is that the collective shadow is where if we're not looking at our individual shadows, then the sort of things that get put out as prejudices, remarks that are hurtful and full of disdain and ill will start to resonate and gets crystallised in the collective. And you can see that happening. We know that historically, and we can even see examples of that today. The point being is it takes enough of us to keep saying no and doing our shadow work publicly. The teacher I worked with, Anima and Animus, said city shadows. is the work. You know, let's look at the city shadows, so the collective. And then I think if we can start to really resonate with that, and I mean, Debbie Ford, who's now passed away, wrote a really nice book on this, and she said, you know, you've got to be able to go to that place where you think, oh, that I'm not like that, and you think, well, actually, maybe I am a little bit. Then you're liberated. You don't have to act on it or pretend that you're this or that. Yeah, there's a bit of that in me. Drop it, move on, do something, you know, useful, rather than pretending and shaping yourself in a way that's a fantasy. So I kind of like that viewpoint, that, yeah, you can sort of, it's a bit like owning the thing that if you don't own it, you end up unconsciously projecting it.
Yes.
And it's just like reclaiming that and not feeling weird about
So
it.
it's not about judging yourself to say it's
Yeah.
bad, you're saying it's there.
Yeah.
And understanding it's there and then not energizing it.
Yes.
But the reason why that you will look at it is because you have a higher idea that's going to replace it. It's this judging of it, saying it's something wrong, so you put
Yeah.
it away. But if you can look at the dirty laundry, if you have really good laundry powder to clean it up, because you're going for something so magnificent. So why keep that stuff in a judgment? And it stops you from seeing the God in you.
So I'll tell you a very quick story, very briefly.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful illustration of consciousness is always beckoning. Synchronistically, things will happen that you couldn't manufacture. Hitler entertained Mussolini in Berlin, put on a big show, and said there would be no public talks in Berlin that day. Max Zeller wrote a book and said, well, how interesting, because Jung had been invited to Berlin on that day. And Hitler then thought, oh, he got in a complex and thought, well, that'd be very rude of me to deny this very eminent psychologist, so I'll let him come. So the only two shows in town that day were Hitler and Mussolini being adored by the collective shadow, and enough people in one room talking about consciousness, and Hitler passed under the window of Jung's talk at the time he was talking. He went very silent, and Max Zeller said his response was, well, ladies and gentlemen, world history has just passed us by. And it's up to us to whether we want to make the history that's right for us, or the one that we're just going to unconsciously let happen.
Yeah.
So that takes awareness. And what I find very interesting was that was a minority in that room. What would it take to make that the majority? That's a question.
Thank you. Ginger, Mick, thank you very much.
Thank
Renata,
you.
thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to show you the books once again. Memories of the Bright Side of the Moon, and the by Ginger, and the Unselfish Spirit by Mick. So thank you both for coming along,
You're welcome.
and thank you for watching Conscious TV.
Thank you.
Thank you.